animal feeding operation presentation by the Dakota Resource Council, volunteer Madeline Luke and former County Commissioner, Red River Basin Commission member Stephanie Marinowski. And so with that, we'll begin. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to speak with you. It feels very comfortable to be sitting here once again. And thank you very much. And I will begin because I have my 15 minutes and I want to use every minute. Thank you. My name is Stephanie Marinowski and I reside in Wilkin County, Minnesota, near a small town called Kent. We are just 45 miles south of Moorhead, Minnesota. Kent is a sleepy little town with an elevator, a bank, a small post office, a Catholic church, and 30 homes. They have a small community center where they have their city council meetings. This way of life that they want to preserve is soon to be destroyed by a mega agricultural industry that will deplete their water supply or very likely contaminate the Red River with pollutants that are extremely harmful. Myself and the people I represent here today have little or no input because it is located on the other side of the river that we share with the state of North Dakota. As you cross the bridge and you go through the historical Fort Abercrombie, you are once again greeted by a peaceful, beautiful town of Abercrombie with a museum of history relating to the early indigenous people and the workings of the early settlers. The people here want to maintain their way of life and keep their clean drinking water and recreational fishing tournaments. These things we take for granted are in jeopardy due to the decisions made by state agencies that permit these large animal operations. With no environmental review or study on the effects these concentrated animal feeding operations will have on the land or the waterways, we are forced to live with the threat of loss of clean drinking water or the harmful pollutants that will find their way into our aquifer and the natural waterways nearby. With little or no input from the state of North Dakota, these CAFOs are being built with lightning speed and more confined animals than the state has ever had, with most of the product leaving the state. This area has had contamination issues in the past, with a lagoon leak at the nearby Mindak sugar beet plant and the recent hydrochloric acid cloud just this year. The floods have always been of great concern in this area, with the spring runoff or the potential for heavy rains. These massive lagoons that house the manure and the direct application of the manure need proper monitoring. Who and just how often will these operations be monitored? This 12,500 head of Riverview dairy cattle has been allowed to start construction in the middle of 3 natural waterways, the Antelope Creek, the Wild Rice River, and the border river, the Red River of the North, that supplies water for major cities such as Fargo, Moorhead, Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, and all the way up to Winnipeg. All the way up to Lake Winnipeg. If this isn't concern enough, the lagoon is being placed right on top of the Wahpeton buried aquifer that supplies drinking water for the city of Wahpeton and Breckenridge. The people that are here with me today represent the concerned citizens of Wahpeton, Breckenridge, Abercrombie, Kent, Native American tribes, Canada. We know that the Red River Basin Commission has a long history of wanting to achieve a basin-wide commitment to comprehensive, integrated watershed stewardship and management by balancing natural systems and human needs. With one of your strategic goals to advocate for a conducive regulatory environment, we want to encourage the North Dakota members on this board to listen to the pleas of your citizens and the citizens of your bordering states, to be diligent in the permitting process and to consider the environmental impacts. It is much more costly to turn a blind eye to these concerns than to deal with them before they happen. And I want to thank you very much for this time you've given me. And now I'll turn it over to Madeline Luke.
There we we go. Again, thank you for giving us this time to speak. I actually was a member of the Red River Basin Board until 2016 myself, so thank you. So Dr. John Eichert, a noted ag economist, said, when you put too much stuff in one place, bad things happen. We're not talking about a few hundred or 1,000 cows in the Red River Valley, but of 12,500 at Abercrombie, and the biggest one that Riverview has attempted to get, 25,000 in Herbert Township in Trail County. According to Riverview documents, about 311 million gallons of animal waste will be generated. The waste will be stored in lagoons, 2 at Abercrombie and 4 at Herbert. In total, they equal about 50 football fields in area at the top surface and are 24 feet deep. The Abercrombie dairy is 1.4 miles from the Wild Rice River and 1.8 miles from the Red River. It sits on top of the aquifers, which Stephanie mentioned. The Herberg Dairy is 2.5 miles from the Elm River and 1.5 miles from the Red River. And 11% of the Herberg site is in the floodplain. So, what bad things could happen? I think of them in 3 categories. First of all, there's acts of God. Spring floods, wet cycles with torrential summer rains, derecho winds, tornadoes. Wet cycles, we've been through all this. These are extreme weather events that seem increasingly likely with climate change. Could such events exceed design tolerances? And then there's, of course, the possibility of early freeze-up or wet springs or falls that make it impossible to get manure hoses out in the field or freeze the ground so hard that you can't inject the manure. Second of all, there's reasonably foreseeable problems. The waste will be piped through hoses to 11,744 acres of fields at Abercrombie and 32,448 acres in Trail County. And it's estimated the furthest field is 15 miles away and includes crossing the river to Minnesota. What are the chances of leaks or broken hoses putting waste where it doesn't belong? At Abercrombie particularly, numerous small streams and the 3 rivers that Stephanie mentioned, they flow through or around many of the fields. What are the chances that the waste is going to be applied too close to surface water? And then thirdly, there are some issues that are definitely baked into the process. The nutrient management plans are required to assure that excess nutrients do not run off into surface water. An independent agronomist cited problems with the plan from Herbert, including unclear crop rotations, overestimation of nutrient uptake, and lack of a nitrogen budget for a complete rotation. For Abercrombie, Riverview's own agronomist said that the soil tests used to design the nutrient management plan were faulty and needed to be repeated. Without valid baseline soil tests, it's impossible to come up with a nutrient management plan. And then there are the lagoons. Clay-lined lagoons are designed to leak. Herberg Dairy's lagoons are lined with 24-inch clay liners. The Department of Water Resources calculates there'll be a seepage rate of about 42.5 million gallons the first year and then 13.5 million gallons per year. The plume that forms under the lagoon will go downslope miles away to the Red River, carrying salts, antibiotics, nutrients, hormones, bacteria, parasites, and industrial chemicals. Given the multiple risks to the Red River, what kind of protections does it have? Is there sufficient regulation and enforcement to protect surface water? The initial permit for Abercrombie and the present permit for Herberg had no requirement for monitoring wells. After a bunch of pushback, the Abercrombie dairy has both monitoring wells and a triple layer synthetic liner, which should be protective. Herberg dairy has neither. The 43,000 acres which will have manure applied heavily, are heavily drained, but there's no monitoring for water quality at the outflows at either site. What is the record on enforcement? And I'll talk about 2 cases which I believe raise legitimate questions about the consistency in enforcement. A CAFO in the northern part of the state needed repeat reminders to submit required soil, water, and manure data. A leaking manure tank took 2 years to replace. On several occasions, more than the permitted number of animals were on site. Too many animals equals too much manure on the amount of land designated for spreading, and this equals to runoff in the Red River. There are no penalties for any of these violations. Secondly, a small cattle feed lot applied for permission to expand into a CAFO, increasing its animal numbers by 60%. One of the 3 mandated monitoring wells has not been replaced in 5 years. For the last 8 years, the nitrate levels in one of the remaining wells exceeded the allowable EPA limit. Again, no action was taken, and the permission to expand was granted anyway. These cases illustrate why there's concern that these large livestock operations may not be held to consistent standards of monitoring and compliance. So, I would ask that a moratorium be placed on these projects until a thorough international joint water board review of all the permits of these projects, public comments and outside technical evaluations completed. Oh, I forgot one more thing. There are a couple of drains coming from these projects, which are going to be totally unregulated. Number two, the International Joint Water Board examined the track record of enforcement actions on existing CAFOs to better understand existing gaps in the system. And number three, the Red River Basin Commission strengthened water quality monitoring on the Red River and its tributaries up and downstream from these projects, such that the data collection will stand up to legal and scientific review. These projects must be held liable for any pollution coming from their operation. I will have reference available for anybody who wants them. Thank you. James?
Thank you very much, Stephanie, Madeline, and for the board being here today. My name is James Badham. I'm the Executive Director of the Manitoba Eco Network. We are an umbrella organization for environmental nonprofit organizations in Manitoba. And I'm here today as a part of a coalition from numerous groups, as you can see, in both U.S. states and in Canada, because water is not confined by international boundaries. I'm sure everyone here knows that, but I think it's important to recognize that. It's important to recognize that what happens in North Dakota, as well as Minnesota, South Dakota, Montana, Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and my home province of Manitoba all impact Lake Winnipeg. And Lake Winnipeg is in a state of crisis. And the waters from these 4 U.S. states and 4 Canadian provinces, they all flow into Lake Winnipeg. It serves as the center of a huge inland watershed basin. And excessive nutrient loads into Lake Winnipeg have caused eutrophication, the loss of oxygen in the lake, toxic blue-green algae, and the Red River and Lake Winnipeg simply cannot handle anymore. Now, there's an international treaty between Canada and the United States, the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909, and in accordance with the Boundary Waters Treaties Act, has been established, I'm sure everyone knows this, but just to put it on the record, the International Joint Commission, or IJC. And the IJC role is to deal with transboundary water disputes and provide recommendations. And in fact, in May of 2020, the IJC recommended the adoption of nutrient objectives at the international boundary. And so I'm going to speak specifically to the measurements at the Emerson boundary. There are other measurements in other rivers, of course, but in 2022, the recommended targets were approved by the US and Canadian government. So this has been approved internationally by both governments, and those nutrient concentrations and loads substantially exceed the targets. And then IJC also notes that the nitrogen and phosphorus concentration loads have consistently exceeded the targets for decades. So just to put that into context, nitrogen concentrations should be 1.15 milligrams per liter. But as of the last measurements we have in 2022, it's more than double that at 2.49 milligrams per liter. And the total average annual nitrogen load is 25% over the objective. The objective is just below 12,000. The objective is just above 9,500 tons, and the actual annual load is just below 12,000 tons. Phosphorus, which is the primary factor leading to eutrophication and the suffocation and the death of Lake Winnipeg, is even worse. Phosphorus concentration should be 0.15 milligrams per liter at the Red River International boundary, but it's triple that amount at 0.40 milligrams per liter. And the average annual load is 69% over the target. It should be about 1,400 tons per year, and it's just below 2,400 tons per year. And you can find that on page 34 of the IJC's annual report from 2022, and I can provide that upon request, of course. Once again, these targets have been agreed to by both governments. And now, to turn to the issue, these 2 large dairy operations are almost undoubtedly going to increase those nutrient flows even more when Lake Winnipeg simply cannot handle it. And so, I think as Madeline and Stephanie pointed out, we're looking at 37,500 animals. As I understand it, there may be even further developments to move forward beyond that. But just looking at these 2 operations alone, that would quadruple the dairy herd size in North Dakota, and it would nearly be the entire size of the dairy herd in Manitoba. But one of the things to recognize about our dairy industry in Manitoba is that In part, I would say because of supply management, but we have much smaller operations. We have 240 producers with an average farm size of 190 cows. So we're not looking at 12,500 or 25,000. That massive concentration, it's a threat, as we've heard, to local groundwater, but it's also a threat to our watershed in Manitoba and in particular Lake Winnipeg.
Okay, that's it. It's 11 o'clock, and so we have a business meeting, so I appreciate you coming here, and I appreciate all the people that